for today's National Learning Community webinar on Strategic Prevention Framework and the 3 tiers of prevention. My name is Mark Taylor. I'm the virtual event manager for today's webinar. On behalf of the Native Connections team and contracting officer representatives, Maureen Madison and Yondan Bard Cooper, thanks for joining us today. Our presenters today will review the Strategic Prevention Framework and the 3 tiers of prevention and how it can support a Native Connections approach. All phone lines will be muted to minimize outside noise. You can use the raise hand function in Zoom, and we can call on you if you would like to comment, or feel free to enter questions or comments in the chat box anytime during the webinar. And right now, I'll turn it over to Jacqueline for our opening today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome. I want to welcome each and every one of you to today's National Learning Community. And I want to start out with sharing a couple of good words before we start our NLC. So, this morning I was thinking about what would I say, right, when I came into this space and place with our grantees and our colleagues here today. And one word that really struck me today, this morning, as I was getting ready, was impact. And the thought of water came across my mind. So when we're out with community and when we're working with community, we're so entrenched and we're so enmeshed in the job that we're doing, right? The work that we're doing, the relationships, the interactions that we take part in every single day. I can think back of a time when working with Native Connections programming, when every single time I went out, I was trying to build relationships. I was trying to make a positive change, right? And sometimes it felt like I wasn't doing much. Sometimes it felt like, oh, what am I doing here? What's my purpose? What's my meaning? And it took a long time for me to kind of sit down, and I remember talking to different individuals and different elders who gave me some guidance that it's okay, take some time, take a breather, and it'll come to you. And so as I was thinking about it, oftentimes I go back to that ripple effect. When we come together and when we're doing programming, that pebble that you drop in the water, if you can visualize a pebble or a rock, sometimes we go out and skip rocks when we're by the water. We sit, we watch certain things, pebbles, throwing them into the water, right? And so I take that analogy of dropping that pebble in the water, and if you watch it, it'll have a ripple effect, right? It'll slowly start to ripple out into the full lake or whatever water place you're nearby, a lake or a stream or a pond. And I really think that's really beautiful, because when it represents for me that effect and that impact that we have on one another, our communities, our colleagues, our grantees, and the individuals that we work with every single day. And so that is basically a reminder that, even though we feel like we're only touching one person, we're only getting the message across to one person, that is still a positive impact. And that individual might go talk to someone. Your words might impact that person to share. And so I wanted to share that piece in a good way today and open up that notion of connection, of that interconnectedness that we have, of that love and care that we have for our communities, because sometimes, we don't see that struggle that's happening in our day-to-day lives with our families, our communities. And I know it pulls on our heartstrings a lot of the times, and that's the main reason why I am here in this place, in this work, and that's my purpose. And so take that piece of information and know that you do make an awesome, positive impact on our communities, on our families, on our youth, and for the future generations. So that is what I'm going to share for our portion of opening up in a good way. And I'm going to turn it over to Hunter to go through why we're here today.
All right, Jacqueline, appreciate those good words all the way from Flagstaff, Arizona, representing the Dene Nation. Jamie, go ahead. I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Hunter Genia. I come from the Ojibwe nations of the Saginaw, Swan Creek, and Black River, and also Grand River Band of Odawa here in the great state of Michigan, Michigan, as some people call it. And I'd like to ask our my colleagues here after I share these objectives to introduce themselves. So today we're going to review and discuss SAMHSA Strategic Prevention Framework, those 5 steps and the 2 guiding principles. And then we're also going to lightly touch on the Institute of Medicine, the classification system, which is where the 3 tiers of prevention, universal, selective, and indicated, come from. And we'll take a look at how the Strategic Prevention Framework and the Institute of Medicine classification system support the Native Connections approach. So at this time, we're going to introduce ourselves again. My name is Hunter Genie. I'm joining you from the great state of Michigan, traditionally pronounced Michigan, which translates from across the water. And I come from the Ojibwe and Odawa nations. Been a grantee technical assistant now for about 8 years, and also a TTA coordinator under SAMHSA for the SAMHSA TTA Center. So that's who I am, and I'm going to ask my colleagues here, Jacqueline and Gloria, to introduce themselves.
Oh, yeah, the Shikedo Shidana. She Kiani Nishlan, Tachini Bushin, Tobahan Edishito, Tudini Edishal, without Stondo and So my name is Jacqueline Salabai. First and foremost, I am Towering House Board for Red Running into the Water Clan. I am my maternal grandparents are Edgewater, and my paternal grandparents are Bitterwater, and that is who I am as a woman and a mother. And I come to you from Flagstaff, Arizona, where it's nice and getting kind of hot. So of course you probably know that. And then I have been a GTA for a little over 2 years. So it's really good to see you all. It's good to see my relatives in the chat. And I welcome each and every one of you to today's NLC. I'll turn it over to Gloria.
Thank you, Hunter and Jacqueline. Tatsmewi, Inamlatua, Inhiwas, Gloria Guillory. Greeted you, good morning, good afternoon. My name is, good morning, my friends. My name, Gloria Guillory again. My family and I live here in Spokane, Washington, but we're from the Nez Perce tribe in Lapwai, Idaho. And I've worked with the SAMHSA projects for quite a while, but I'm currently a tribal training and technical assistance coordinator, as well as deputy project manager. And so it's good to be here on this NLC with you all, and look forward to hearing more of what you're doing as we share. Thank you.
All right. As you can see on that slide there, we're asking everyone just to introduce yourselves, where you're coming from, and also, if you wouldn't mind, tell us what regional learning community that you are coming from as well. Which one do you participate in? So give you some time here, just to introduce yourselves. And they keep coming in. Awesome. And also at this time, we're going to use one of the tools that we like to have our grantees participate, called the Menti. Menti. So as Mark put in the chat there, I'm going to have my wonderful colleague here, Jacqueline, explain about the Menti process here and what we're going to have you do. So Jacqueline.
All right. So as you can see here on the screen, you can see a QR code. You can go ahead and scan that using your phone. Or you can go to menti.com and you can see it in the chat. The code is 2507 and 7257. So go ahead and enter and answer the question. You can introduce yourself here, your name, your program, your RLC community, and share with us 1 or 2 youth programming activities that you are excited about that is taking place this summer. I'm really interested in.
Yeah, I like that. This is also a great opportunity. We've used Menti. Some of our grantees, you may already be using Menti a lot, or maybe not at all. So if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of a nice engagement tool to use, whether you're doing virtual meetings or on site in your community. So if you want to log in there, as Jacqueline shared, and we're like you to share, what are one or two exciting summer youth activities that you are looking forward to? And I see some are using the chat as well, which is great. Looks like Kateri from Sisseton Wahpeton, Dakota Oyate is looking forward to a youth talking circle and digital storytelling project. All right, here we go. Veronica looks like she's doing summer youth camps, younger youth, and then older youth, a basketball camp. Right on. Let's see. Medicine pouch and dream catcher sessions, camping and hiking with youth. Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. A lot of great teachings can happen in our environment, which is innate to who we are. So honoring our resilience.
In the chat, we also have Laura, who's going to do weekly talking circles, youth leadership development opportunities for youth, and coming of age ceremony. Those are great.
Anything stand out to you, Jacqueline?
I see Joseph. He's beginning the native flute group classes this
Ooh.
summer. That's pretty interesting. I haven't heard of a youth group focusing on,
Samantha has equine therapy and Coyote Club. Shamika, the summer recreation summer camp program offering mental wellness and student success tips.
Summer youth camp. Closed Facebook group for students out of the canyon for high school. Awesome. I believe that's Havasupai.
And then
Oh.
Misty in the chat also has summer youth program, upcoming basketball camp at Gona in August, and suicide awareness event in September. And working with Veronica. Busy summer, full.
Wow.
That's great.
Shinoki looking, facilitating trainings, assist in youth health first aid for our Native communities. Shout out to Shinoki. We saw a couple of weeks ago at Gona. Shout out to Linda, who's my grantee.
I think she's like my former grantee from Albuquerque area health board. Hey, stole her from me. All right.
Julie, workshops on rites of passage. Sounds good. Awesome events happening. I'm just still scrolling back through so we can look at what was shared.
I saw Ray Phillips there. He's from the Ponca tribe of Nebraska. It's like some camping and hiking with youth. And I also know they're doing a youth Gona this coming fall. Ponca, Nebraska.
Sacred Hope of Healing, basket weaving, talking circle.
Nice.
Linda from Havasupai, attending the Wallapai Language and Culture Camp.
This is going to tie in real nicely to our 3 tiers of prevention today.
Deborah is going to go to the final canoe journey landing in Lower Washington.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Cheyenne is working with Spirit Lake Suicide Prevention as evaluator, working with youth summer camp and bi-weekly events for the community to come together for activities. And then also Kevin, evaluator, is joining us from Fallon Paiute, Shoshone. Welcome.
Hey, we'll have to get our colleague Josh to sign up for that flute class that Joseph's putting on out there. I think he's looking for some lessons. All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating in Menti, a nice tool that if you're not familiar with, reach out to your GTA and they might be able to help you learn a little bit more about that, or reach out to Jacqueline. She's a great resource on that as well. Jacqueline, back to you.
I'll go with my screen quick. All right, so I appreciate you all sharing. It really helps to see where everyone is at and what's going on in different parts of the country. So for our first portion, we're starting out by going over the Strategic Prevention Framework, SPIF, also known as SPIF. So when I say SPIF, that's what I'm talking about. And we will cover the Native Connections approach, which is also included in this graphic. So on the graphic on the left-hand side, you'll see the Strategic Prevention Framework. On the right, you'll see the Native Connections approach. The Strategic Prevention Framework, most of you are aware of, and if you are not aware of this model, it is a data-driven process and is comprised of 5 steps and 2 guiding principles. So those, as you can see in the graphic, the SPIF includes the 5 steps: assessment, capacity, planning, implementation, and evaluation. I was thinking when I was saying this earlier, I was like, somebody should make a TikTok with a dance on this. Assessment, capacity, planning. Yeah, you would get it done right. So the SPIF also includes 2 guiding principles: cultural competency and sustainability. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But what I want to emphasize on this slide is the SPIF, the Strategic Prevention Framework, is the foundation of the Native Connections approach. And they are interconnected in this way, as you see in the graphic here on the right. And we'll go into more detail on the next slide. So as we move into the next slide, this image is more detailed and very robust in outlining the SPIF with the Native Connections approach. So the Strategic Prevention Framework SPIF includes 5 steps: the assessment, which is identifying local prevention needs based on data. And in this portion, you might ask yourself, are our objectives on target towards outcomes, right? And this area includes the CSA, CRM, the CRM post-workshop. All of those assessments come into play. And then we move into capacity. And this is building local resources and readiness to address prevention needs. And you might be asking yourself here, what do you have to work with? Who are the people, the time? What does my budget look like? And then the next area is planning. The next step is planning, finding out what works to address prevention needs and how to do it well. In here, you might be asking, what should you do and how should you do it? What are my visions and missions? What are my goals and objectives? And then moving into implementation, which is delivering evidence-based programs and practices as intended. You might be asking yourself, how can you put your plan into action? Implementation activities, people, time, and budget, those might be some of the things that you're pondering and thinking about: what, when, where, why, and how are we going to get it done? And then tiers of prevention is taking into consideration. As you can see in the little graphic there, the 3 tiers of prevention. When implementing your SAP and identifying your appropriate populations, this is taken into consideration. We will go into that in more detail as we move through the NLC. And then lastly, evaluation. So examine the process and outcome of programs and practices is what the gist of evaluation is. And you might be asking yourself here, did we reach our outcomes? So as we move into the SPIF, it's also guided by the 2 principles that I was talking about. In the other visual, it was in the center, right? So you can see the people in the center, and it does take part, and it takes the people to do these pieces, right? The 2 guiding principles of cultural competence, which is the ability of an individual or organization to understand and interact effectively with people who have different values, lifestyles, and traditions, based on their distinctive heritage and social relationships. And then we go into sustainability, which is the other guiding principle, the process of building an adaptive and effective system that achieves and maintains desired long-term results. And this is something that we all want, right? We all want to sustain the good. And this is an important aspect to think about as we move through this 5-year program. How do we sustain these activities for the future? And so again, I'm going to emphasize strategic prevention framework is the foundation of the Native Connections approach. So as you see in the Native Connections NC approach, it integrates the SPIF. So in the middle of that diagram, you can see there's a lot more to it, right? We have the medicine wheel here. We have the different acronyms that stand for the different assessments. And then inside the circle, you can see that it's cut into 4 quadrants, and they're each labeled as well as color coded, right? So the Native Connections approach is an indigenous adaptation of the public health model developed for American Indian and Alaska Native communities to address substance misuse and suicide. And the Native Connection approach has 4 foundation blocks. And those are labeled in the circles with the acronyms. Let's pull that up again. I know that. Give it a second. And as you can see, the CSA, CRM, SAP, ISAP, those are included, the 4 areas. So the CSA is the community systems analysis. And that is basically disseminating best practices and focusing on the future, community readiness model. And you can see in the little visual there, it's really tiny. It says reduce suicide behaviors, build relationships. And then the SAP, the Strategic Action Plan, is reducing substance misuse and overdose and closing the gaps. And then the ISAP is the implementation of strategic action planning. And it says promote mental health and observing and maintaining results. So those are the 4 foundation blocks within the Native Connections approach. And some of you have gone through this and you are now possibly in your implementation stage, and some of you might be starting out. That's okay. You can also see the application of the GONA themes as it applies. You can see belonging there, the blue, and that is how we belong. Mastery, which is in the gold, is vision and gaining tools, and also building upon resilience. Interdependence, which is in the maroon, is action and community leadership. And then generosity is giving back, right? So as we take a journey through the Native Connections approach, starting at the very top of the diagram, we will move through each phase. So phase 1, the Native Connections approach, planning. If you can go back, yes, there you go. The Native Connections approach planning begins with the identification of strengths and the collection and assessment of existing services and systems with the helps of tools like the community system analysis, which is an environmental scan and a community needs assessment. And then phase 2, planning continues with more data collection through the community readiness model assessment, while building upon the capacity among staff, the advisory board, including youth and community partners. So here, programs are looking for ways to address the damage sustained by historical trauma and to build and support resilience among the people. And then phase 3, care programs seek to grow through cultural revitalization and interdependence, integrating these throughout their strategic action plan, which includes a vision and mission, clear goals, and smart objectives, activities, outcomes, people assigned, budget, and due dates. And then we move into phase 4. As planning shifts to implementation, we look ahead to a time to review program efforts, the evaluation, and then adjust the SAP as needed and prepare to the next year. Programs should reflect on the foundations of Indigenous evaluation and generosity, including Number 1, traditional knowledge. Number 2, empirical knowledge. And number 3, revealed knowledge to guide program updates. So this diagram, I wanted to put a little bit of a visual, and it really reminded me of the water cycle. And so if you can remember a time in school, I know in science, right? It's really awesome where you got to go outside and learn new things. If you can remember, that evaporation process and convection and precipitation and how it kind of just went into that circular format, right? And collection into water beds. I'm all about water today, talking about lakes and ponds and so forth. And so it has this iterative, repetitive cycle, right? And we have many different cycles that we see in our world, in our spaces, and just taking into consideration our American Indian Alaska Native teachings and how that plays out. So I know that a lot of you hear that in the work that we do, is that we as Indigenous American Indian Alaska Native peoples have always been evaluators. We have always been assessing. So this might be something that is labeled in a different way, but we have always used this in our daily life. So I just want to say that. So for the next few slides, we're going to transition into the next portion. So keep in mind the Native Connections approach. We're going to discuss the SPIF steps one by one, and you're going to share your experience that you have had in your program. And so this is a great opportunity for you to share your experience with us and your peers, and you can share your thoughts that you have around each one of these steps. Feel free to share some best practices and some challenges and how you overcame them. And if you have challenges, perhaps someone can share a success story of how they overcame it. So there's no wrong answers. And chances are other grantees may have had similar experiences. So in the spirit of generosity and giving back, I think it is beneficial to share your experience and speak it into the universe for others to learn. So we're going to move into step 1, which is assessment. So assessment is the first step in the strategic prevention framework. Assessment involves identifying local prevention needs based on data. It's important to assess the nature and extent of both substance use and misuse problems, such as suicide and related behaviors in the community, in order to complete the other steps of the SPIF. So in this area, we're going to ask the question, what kind of assessment considerations or factors might affect your Native Connections program? And like we said earlier, the community readiness assessment, community systems analysis, those tools that you use to assess might come into play, right? And some of the areas that we might be looking at is the knowledge of existing community efforts, or the knowledge of suicide prevention or suicide stigma. You might be also looking at the community's community leaders' support, how much buy-in there is for prevention efforts, the level of probability that local services and systems will support prevention efforts, who are the potential partners, stakeholders. So I'm going to shift gears and go into Menti. And if you want to come off mute or use the chat, we're talking about what kind of assessment considerations or experiences, factors might affect your Native Connections program. So, what? Gloria, Hunter, do you have anything related to this piece? Around assessment. Go ahead and scan the QR code or go to menti.com and enter the code.
Yeah, I appreciate this topic, Jacqueline. I know my first professional work around community-based prevention was in an urban environment for a Native organization in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And, you know, it was kind of like, here, we want you to work with the youth. You know, but I didn't have, you know, they didn't provide any tools or, you know, I had a lot of cultural knowledge, but it was like, okay, how do we, you know, kind of assess the youth and, you know, where they're at and our communities at in terms of community youth prevention or wellness, and you know, where are we going to gather this information? How are we going to gather it? Um, you know, what are some good resources and tools that are culturally, uh, you know, works well with our people, you know? So um, that was kind of one of the things that came to my mind, you know. And so I know as a GTA, I look forward to providing with one of the tools that we use with the community systems analysis, you know, kind of taking a look at our assets and resources that we have in the community first, and then, you know, kind of taking a look at what is our community's truth. And so providing the community readiness virtual training, you know, to the grantees that are wanting to build capacity among their tribe or department and staff or community members. So, but I remember, you know, it's like, man, I wish I had learned that, you know, back in when I first started, someone had actually taught me these. So, so that's kind of something that came to mind for me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. We have one comment. It's not a native instrument. Having a meal and talking is more appropriate. Yep, I agree. I remember being a new program manager and asking some of my mentors in the organization, those who've been there 20 plus years, how they went about assessing the community. And the very first thing that someone told me was, sit down with the elders. They will tell you. And so that's what I did. I went, had some coffee, sat down and just listened to the stories, because it soon came out and they were telling me a lot about what used to be and what they see now. So that's a really good point. I appreciate you sharing that. Another one is the assessment can be a bit difficult to navigate as a nonprofit that serves various Native communities across New Mexico, Southern Colorado, and Northwest Texas. That is a huge area. And the tools and resources for our youth and community, less and less resources for our community. Good point.
Jacqueline and Hunter, as we were talking before, I was trying to think of this catchphrase one of our former colleagues always mentioned or shared, but I think it may have been Cipriano or Don Lyons, but he always says, what gets assessed gets addressed. And so, you know, whatever you're looking for to address, you know, and you're doing an assessment of it, it's important to look at, you know, either whatever tool you use and however you might look at indigenizing it, but just it's a good way to look at you know, assessing what needs to be addressed. Just because if we don't address it or we don't attempt to assess it, then it might not, you know, down the line be something that's brought up. But I couldn't remember who it was, but it just came to me. Trying to think
That's
of it
good.
before, but
Yeah, it's a good way to remember that, right? Another comment is inherently subjective. So when interviewing leadership, they will likely score the leadership questions highly. Therefore, low or high scores may not always be accurate. That's a good point. Dependent on who's scoring, right? And their personal bias and or where they're coming from. That's a really good point. Like that. That's something that we should take into consideration, right? Is it effective, efficient? How will the information gathered from the assessment be used? I think another thing that I've learned is how much assessment is too much, right? When do we stop assessing and start moving forward? Ensuring interviews align with traditional values. Yes.
That one there, yeah, I appreciate that thought there. And you know, and there are certainly ways to, I would say, use traditional approaches when meeting with our people or our community, and you know, practicing some of those protocols and etiquette, you know, and even like how we ask, you know. So I appreciate that ensuring interviews align with traditional values, because you know there are ways to do that with some of these instruments and tools. But being able to have that conversation, it's definitely a conversation I have with my grantees. You know, how do we use the CRM, and where are there opportunities to use cultural approaches to, you know, make sure that it's, you know, going to be an okay process.
Yes. There have been many previous assessments, interviews, and surveys. Community members want to know what happened with previous assessments. That's a really good point, and giving back, you know, that comes with that SPIF model. And if you take a look at community-based research models as well, that's part of the process, right? You give back the information and you ask community, you know, is this what you said? This is what I heard. Is this accurate? And I think community will keep you on your toes and remind you, like, you know, what happened to that assessment? What happened to that information, right? Building trust can be important. Native communities have been surveyed so much, yes. And that is where that component comes into play, right? Not only is there that thought process of what we're going to assess, we're going to address, right? What Gloria was just saying, which is awesome. But we also have to think about some of those things that fall in line with assessment. And that could be that trust piece, right? And what are you doing with this information? What are you going to do with this information? That's a really important piece. So I really appreciate your interaction and participation. We're going to move into the step 2. So
Jacqueline, also, before you move on, that building trust, and I think that's what came up in for many communities, especially our smaller communities where everyone knows. And so that the point of the community readiness model and the assessment interviews is really trying to maintain that confidentiality. But, you know, sometimes we know people in the community. So if they're going to offer their feedback, you know, that we're making sure we're not showing their names or know, you know, where they're from, just so that they can share freely and there's no repercussions, or, you know, if they don't know what's going to happen to some of their feedback. And so that's always that trust part, is maintaining that throughout whatever readiness tool that you use or assessment tool that you use, is that confidentiality, but also where you store the information and, you know, how it's shared. So just kind of wanted to add on to that.
That is really a good point, because that trust, how you house that information and where it's kept, the confidentiality associated with that really does play into how community members are going to respond from that point on, right? Because I've heard a lot of different communities say, you know, well, I'm not going to participate because ABC. And that's a really good point. So sometimes a lack of willingness and trust to give accurate answers, or on the other hand, community giving answers that they think you want to hear, is hard to get an accurate picture of the needs. That's a good point.
I think someone said it earlier, it's subjective, you know, all of the scores. You try to use the ranking and the come to consensus, but I think overall, just the accurate answer, because I've had one early on in Native Aspirations Project, she just stayed on level 9. She's like, nope, we're doing everything right. We're doing it. And everyone else is like 2 or 3. And so then you just kind of take an average of it, and it's really just getting that baseline of assessment. And so where do you build from there? But also the people doing it might kind of know. And so it's not a hard task, or it's just kind of they say it's the community's truth. And so then just starting that it's not a hard and fast rule that, oh, we're at this number, so we have to stay at this number. So just either it's high, it's low, or it's right on, and just using that as your baseline to continue to move forward on is a good practice, because we've seen doing these over the years, there's varying states of readiness based on some of that willingness to give accurate answers, and sometimes they might be point on, but you're not sure.
Thanks for that. Is there anything in the chat that we're missing?
Did not see any comments there.
Okay, I'm going to move and transition out of Menti. Give me 1 second. And we will move into step 2, which is capacity. We really should be doing a quiz, but like, what's the next step? There's raffle. Just kidding.
We love
Everyone
raffles.
raise their hand. I was kidding. Okay, so moving into the next strategic prevention framework, we have the second step, capacity. And so program managers assess the capacity to determine whether they have the necessary resources to expand, improve, or sustain a program. If capacity is limited, they may seek additional funding, training, or make adjustments, course corrections to their plan to ensure success, right? So capacity refers to the ability of a program, organization, or a team to effectively carry out its responsibilities and achieve its objectives. So this includes factors such as resources, personnel, infrastructure, and expertise. So the question here is, what capacity considerations might affect your Native Connections program? And some thoughts around capacity include readiness for change, which is the community's attunement to the need for change, organizational capacity, the ability of an organization to manage operations, funding and strategic planning, operational capacity, the efficiency of processes, workflows, and the logistical systems needed to deliver services. So there are different tools associated that we use to identify where we fall in line in terms of all of these areas. The readiness for change, capacity for organizational and operational. And then there's also other opportunities to build capacity. And what are those, right? There's many other ways. So I'm going to transition over to Menti again. You can use the chat box, but I will pull up Menti. What capacity considerations might your Native Connections might factor? Sorry, I'm trying to pull up something and talk at the same time. Made out to do. I'm just kidding. Give me a second. So, as we talk about the next question, what capacity considerations might affect your Native Connections program? That's what I was trying to say. Any thoughts around capacity? Scan the QR code or go to menti.com, put in the code. If you stayed on your cell phone, it'll just switch automatically. And you can put your answers in there. We talk a lot about building capacity, right? Within Native Connections, when we come on NLCs, RLCs, webinars. What kind of thoughts do you all have around this?
I think this is important too, Jacqueline, with starting with assessment, because that really gives you that information of where you can start, and realistic view of your capacity considerations, your infrastructure, the support that's needed. And so that whole needs assessment that goes prior to this will help kind of look at what capacity do we have now. We're assessing what has to be addressed, but what is our current capacity? But then what other considerations do we need to take into consideration going forward? So I just like that process of the SPIF is really looking at each of those elements or those steps that lead in support one another. So
Right, exactly. Using those assessment tools to gather information on where you stand in terms of your capacity. And I know that the CRM is a really good tool to use in terms of readiness and what is the community's voice and what is the temperature of the community in terms of the specific areas that you're looking at, whether that's suicide prevention, substance use, mental health, right? And what are some of those strategies that you can work with the community to identify to increase some of those perspectives regarding those different areas? I think that's one of the reasons why I love to do the CRMs, and then working with youth, right? Because we're always building capacity with our youth and training them up to, I always say, to take our jobs, because that's what I want them to do, is take my job. I want it to be awesome and amazing and be in a position where they're able to help and give back. So I see 2 comments here. There are only so many trainers on our team. If one of us is out, it can be a challenge to get another trainer to fill in. Oh yeah, we can agree to that one. I have seen Native Connections funding be rescinded due to lack of staffing. If an organization lacks staffing capacity, grant programs typically are abandoned. People don't access services.
I think the comment, thank you for that comment on the trainers, because we see that often as many of us wear different hats in communities, or you all. But I've seen a lot of projects or programs also look at recruiting, doing, if you're able to, provide training opportunities or honorariums to adults, youth, elders, to try to get more people involved, because inevitably with the many duties that you take on in community, but then also the turnover. So how do we get more people trained in case there are some changes in staffing or transitions or bringing on new people? And so it's not always just that 1 or 2 that are doing the training, but doing that kind of recruitment, identifying people who are interested as they're taking part in your prevention activities, signing up for volunteers who might be interested. So yeah, that's a good comment, because we see that a lot and have experienced that a lot.
Good point. Cross training is really important. I was thinking about, working with our youth and what that looked like, and training them with how to conduct interviews, community readiness assessment. You don't know until you do it, right? Response that you'll get. It's like, oh, well, sometimes we have this thought notion that things won't work out until you do it. You see the fruits that come out of that, planting those seeds, right? Sometimes internal tribal departments processes can create barriers to getting things done quickly. HR can make it tough to fill positions. Finance department too. It's a real life events that happen, right? Yep, staff availability and difficulty in recruitment when there's only 1 or 2 staff members. Yep.
In the chat too about funding, turnover, reliable resources, and finding people that have the heart to do the job. Our community needs consistency, and that came from Misty Castro. So we do hear a lot of that with our Native Connection grantees, for sure. The workforce challenges, so I do know that, when I have a grantee that wants, training on something like CRM, for instance, I try to encourage them to invite as many people as possible across the tribe or organization and community, and fill up that virtual room. Let's get as many people trained as possible. That's just one example, but yeah, just because of the staffing shortages and some of those challenges.
Is there anything else in the chat?
I think that was it.
Okay. Thank you for sharing about, staffing shortages, funding turnover, reliable resources, and finding people that have the heart to do the job. Our community needs consistency. Time of year, if all high school students must leave to attend high school, then only very short time for activities and inclusion of youth. Yes. And that's a reality, right? Some of our youth go off to school. And, working in rural areas, a lot of the youth go to boarding school. So they're away from the community. And, youth camps are often taking place in summer, a lot of youth activities, and that can cause some miscommunication or missing those youth during the rest of the year. So that's a very challenging piece. And a lot of your voices, what you shared, those are real life things that we are actually looking at right now. So funding and turnover, that's very real in our communities. We're constantly hearing those things. So it's very important that we start to build those capacities with our youth and training up those younger generations, right? So before I start preaching, I'm going to go on to the next slide. We're going to go into step 3.
Preach it, Jacqueline. Preach it.
All right. So now we move into the planning step, strategic prevention framework. So what kind of planning considerations might affect your Native Connections program? So some examples and just a little bit about this planning stage. Planning, make community representation a priority in the planning process, right? So that community representation is very important. Making sure that you have engagement from youth, parents, families, elders across the board, right? To talk about some of those things that they're seeing and hearing in community, because community is the expert. Being sure that all are clear on the identified disparities the program aims to address. And so using those assessments, like Gloria was saying, using the assessments and addressing, right? And what are we addressing? And making sure that everyone is clear. Because I remember a point working as a program manager, that vision we had wasn't there. And we're all wondering, like, what are we working towards? Yes, mental health, but like, what are we working towards, And so I can see that it's very important having that clear identification. And then prioritizing the risk and protective factors associated with the substance misuse problems that have been identified. So prioritizing the risk and protective factors associated with the substance misuse problems that have been identified. Selecting appropriate programs and practices to address each priority factor, and then combining programs and practices to ensure a comprehensive approach. And so the planning process, again, we're going to go back to Menti. As we think about planning, I want to ask you what kind of planning considerations might affect your Native Connections program. I can think of many different things. So I'm going to switch gears and go to Menti, okay? Menti, and let's go to step 3. Let's talk about planning. What are some of those considerations or factors that affect planning in your Native Connections program?
I think we heard earlier too that a person mentioned that they serve multiple areas and possibly across states. And so that planning could be, how do we do that across so many segments of a community or through covering different states? So that's always a challenge.
Yes, planning in multiple different areas, right? Some of our communities have multiple villages that they might have to go to get information. And the question always comes back is, do we need a plan for each area? Or do we need just one specific plan? And so that's some of the questions that we often hear. I see someone's comment. As Native communities, we have food when we gather, However, strategic prevention framework partnerships for success and Native connections funding doesn't allow for food. It really hinders. It really hinders program quality for bringing people together. Oh yeah, food's very important. I
Yeah,
remember,
and I think that's where a lot of collaboration and partnerships, like if you can, and I know that's difficult in many communities, and um, I know with a lot of our gonas that we do in communities for Native Connection grantees, and you can only spend $3 a head for food, and so it's gets very difficult. And I know they've relied on other departments that may have grants that do allow to, so to collaborate or partner, or they've requested tribal council or leadership to, help support their event, or events with food or things like that. And, so, but that's definitely been echoed, with Native Connections.
right, and I just go off of my experience of being a program manager at one point and how many times I went out of pocket just to get some food in the crock pot so that way our community advisory board or our lunch and learn or our giving back on the CRM scores, so we would have food available. And yeah, it was a way for me to show some generosity and share. And it was also a way that we could come together and just talk about different things. And, we would sit, eat for the first 30 minutes. It was amazing how much discussion we would get out of that piece, as opposed to sitting in a meeting with an agenda. And sometimes we're afraid to speak up because we feel like we're not supposed to be speaking at that time, right? So some of the Western approaches might hinder those voices as well. So I'm thinking about planning and how we share our voice. And I think that's the beauty of GONA and how we conduct certain meetings. We use different ways of communicating like we are doing today. So going into the next comment, including youth voices planning. Nothing about us without us. Yeah, that's very important.
Yeah.
Being youth-led, yes. Besides not being able to spend money on food and depending on other programs due to remote area, may have difficulty in getting some supplies. Yeah, being creative is fortunately and also beneficial in becoming creative when you work in rural areas.
Yeah. Especially if you're one person.
Mhm,
And you
right.
got to do the, ERA and everything else, the reports, and implement your strategic action plans. So hats off to all of you who only have one or two staff in your Native Connections. You
Planning
are.
for, yes, you're
There are also some
worthy.
comments, Jacqueline, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm going to read this last one. Planning for
Sure.
sustainability. These funds will likely not be available in perpetuity. Also planning a GONA in year one among all other aspects of assessment. It can be difficult if not organized. Thank you for your comment. Gloria?
Yeah, so we have several comments here, and Patricia says regarding food, we collaborate, partner with other departments within the college or community. Thank you for sharing. What funding resources have been previously used that allow for food? And see our SPF events at SPF events. Great info. Julie has to leave, and departments with grant money that allow for food, or some comments and recommendations. I'm not aware of funding sources that have allowed food previously, but Jacqueline or Hunter, you?
I heard of one grant that we used to work with that was a CDC grant, and it was around traditional practices, and they allowed us to buy healthy foods. So we would get, healthy salads, and we would also instruct on the importance of healthy eating and how that plays into our daily life, our mental health, physical health, spiritual, emotional health. So that is one TIPWIC grant, I believe, what it was called. So, is it okay if I transition to step 4?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Appreciate all the comments, everyone. Thank you.
Right. So step 4. I see Val's comment. Gloria, do you want to read Val's comment?
Yeah, so we have Steve talking about SDPI, diabetes grant loss for food. Hunter reiterates that public health grants that possibly allow for food for diabetes grant programs. And then Val talks about in Alaska, we work planned around the different subsistence hunting, fishing, and gathering seasons as far as things that affect NC program and planning. So kind of the planning considerations that come into effect regarding the subsistence gathering and fishing in other seasons.
Mm-hmm. I believe some of those grants that, just thinking outside of the box in terms of thinking about other areas, food and food sovereignty and food, just in general, how in working in rural areas, the lack of food and the lack of healthy foods. Some of those grants I've seen come out in terms of creating those partnerships and or allowing for food sovereignty and all of those good things to come out. I've seen that in the last couple of years, and I just wanted to talk about that real briefly. So as we move into step 4, we're talking about implementation. So the kind of implementation, what kind of implementation considerations might affect your Native Connections program? And so in this portion, ensuring consistent reach to youth populations in need of the program. And so sometimes, I look at this area because a lot of the times we expect youth to come to us, right? And a lot of the times we have to go to the youth because, they're not sure of what the program is. So a lot of the times we have to go to the youth in the schools or after school programs. And then looking at being youth-led, how are we bringing youth to the table to participate in some of the decision-making for planning, for implementation, for the full process, right, of the SPIF. And so taking that into consideration, that's one of the reasons why I say I wanted to train youth to take my job, because when they came in through the door as volunteers or youth ambassadors, we would take them and we would train them at every single aspect of the program, even down to sitting with me as a program manager and talking about, what are the next plans if this is what we're doing, and bringing them to board meetings and saying, this is what a board meeting is, and this is how it's running, this is how it functions, and really incorporating them into the community advisory board as seat members. So that was one of the ways that we did it in this area. Involvement of these populations in design and delivery of the program, especially the youth voice, and striving for being youth-led, and understanding that people may wish to participate in different ways and that they may have different learning styles, incorporating the youth voice and maintaining engagement, and creating buy-in of leaders, stakeholders, and youth. So, you know the drill. I'm going to switch over to Menti. You can enter into chat or you can come off mute, and we're going to talk about what kinds of implementation considerations or factors might affect your Native Connections program. All right. Let's see. 4, implementation. What kinds of implementation considerations, factors might affect your Native Connections program? You can scan the QR code, or if you're still on your phone, it should change automatically.
Again, just a comment from the planning portion that comes prior to that, that really does impact positively, or whether or not that it's implemented as it's planned. And so really detailing that through the planning process is going to be helpful during implementation of, what it is, what the activity, how often, what time, who's responsible, how much funding, and then really going into implementation. So then we know who, what, where, when, and that if that's outlined, then it's easier to implement. And the support, like someone said, more than 1 or 2 people doing the implementation.
And training procedures. How is this going to be set up? I was thinking about implementation in community where we think one approach will be beneficial for youth, community, right? And we put it into play and what that looks like, and what do we all need for implementation. And really the next step, what we're going to talk about, is that evaluation process and how it plays out, right? Because we can kind of feel it when we go into community, whether it's working or not working. And I talked about earlier is assessing and really thinking about how the implementation played out, and if there needs to be tweaks or changes in the implementation process. What does that consist of? So just some thoughts that came to my mind. What are some of your considerations or factors that might affect your Native Connections programming when it comes to implementation?
I was going to read Hunter's comment, but you can comment on it, Hunter. Hunter said,
Yeah, that managing complex change, which could be a whole workshop and training on its own, but just thinking about those variables, and just one missing part in there can lead to frustration, false starts, and just, can really hamper the planning.
Right. I like that managing complex change visual. It really does kind of outline the recipe for success, right? And how, if something's missing, it's not going to turn out. It's not going to be the best fry bread. Just kidding. So I see 2 comments. I think y'all said it, but not allowing youth to contribute to the planning, particularly with activities, can be detrimental. Working with youth to develop smart goals will ensure implementations. Some good words right there. Are there any other comments? Anything in the chat?
I don't see any other comments.
So I think we can move into
Got a
the last
thumbs up by Steve. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. All right, I'm going to move into the next one, and that'll be step 5. And well, evaluation. Kind of touched on this a little bit, right? I know they go hand in hand and they play off each other. And it's really good to talk about it specifically, but also understanding that they do work in collaboration and build upon each other. So the last step, evaluation. How are we looking at what didn't work and what worked, so we can continue providing successful programs? So in this area, you're identifying what was done well and what needs improvement, measuring the impacts of programs and practices to understand if they were effective or how effective. I'm using to report to sponsors, and resources are being used widely, not only sponsors, but community, right? And building that trust that you gathered information from me, and now I'm seeing. And this is really what we're saying collectively. Building credibility and support for effective prevention programming in the community, and systemically documenting and providing, describing prevention activity. That's a really important piece too, is that now that you have gone through this whole process, you have a documentation of the SPIF and how you went through programming, right? You can describe your prevention activities and whether or not it was fruitful, and or if you need to go back to the drawing board and make some changes. So we're going to go back to Menti, or you can use the chat, come off mute and share. If you want to come off mute, just raise your hand. And Menti. Again, you know the drill. Scan the QR code, go to menti.com and enter the code. Evaluation. What evaluation considerations or factors affect your Native Connections program? What do y'all think? What was the previous one? Gloria, I like your perspective on how the previous builds.
I don't see any more comments.
And we did talk about it before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Linda, the check mark. Yay. And I know some of you might be, evaluation is really interesting piece because we can have conversations with people in the community, right? And we can hear the positive feedback from the community and words. But when you give them an evaluation or a survey or, hey, fill this out, it kind of stops there, right? Some people are hesitant, or they might be rushed to fill it out. And I'm just wondering, what does that look like? And I know some of you might be in the developmental stages of creating some of those tools to assess your program, evaluate your program, and what direction it's currently going. And so that's something that's going along with, you know, American Indian, Alaska Natives, and how we do things. We sit down, we eat, we talk about it, right? So data sovereignty and hesitancy. Data sovereignty. It's a good piece. We could go on days on that one. Community engagement. Can you expand on community engagement a little bit? If you could, maybe in the chat or on Menti. I'd like to hear a little bit more. Hesitancy, yeah, I agree.
I think that data sovereignty and hesitancy, we've seen that in the past where some communities might have partnerships with tribal colleges or local IRB, their internal review board, to look at any evaluation activities that might be done within their tribe or their community or their people. And so having those safety nets, but it does take time to set up. Some are more lengthy than others, but we've had to go through those as well to get approvals, IRB approval.
So I see type of data collected, how it will be presented, make sure presented to council. They need to celebrate success. Good point. That's really important, what questions you ask, right? And how you ask them. Kind of going off of what you just commented there. The federal administration currently in office has impacted the language we use for youth mental health first aid trainings. Yep, it's real. Something that we have to adjust to. Right? Is there anything in the chat?
Don't see any other comments.
Okay. All right, we're gonna stop here and we're going to move into the next portion. I'm going to pass it over to Gloria to talk about sustainability.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for leading that discussion, and her portion of opening up the SPIF and the Native Connection approach and going through each of those steps. We thought it was important for us to take that time to really lay that foundation, but also to hear from you all instead of us just sharing, because we know all of you provide that experience and knowledge of what's working, what's not, any other considerations, any other tips that others might provide. So I know Hunter's going to go over some information about the 3 tiers of prevention. So I want to kind of go through these quickly, just because Jacqueline did cover both of these guiding principles in her opening. And so just reflecting back on sustainability is really, what do we want to look at and sustain in the efforts that are being partaken by community members or grantees that are implementing the SAPs. And sustainability is, it does take time. An important lesson that we've heard over the years is not just starting, it's not a linear process. It's not included in the SPIF after evaluation. Its sustainability encompasses across all segments or all steps of the SPIF, and really beginning that, looking at how do we want to sustain the efforts beyond this grant program, beyond the funding. What do we have in our communities? And one of our former colleagues, Elizabeth Cookie Rose, she said that she'd go into the villages and say, what do we already have in place? We don't doesn't rely on funding, doesn't rely on grant requirements. What do we already have in place to move these efforts forward, and then building from there? An important one is prevention takes time. Sometimes we want to see results happen really quickly, but just having that the patience and knowing that the efforts, they might not see results over time, but over time you'll see that. And I think another elder that I worked with previously, he said that he was up in Alaska, and he said he was telling his community members at their gathering of Alaska Natives, he said, don't be discouraged if you're not seeing changes. He said the prevention work for suicide, it's like an iceberg. He said we see it up on top of the water, this structure, this force of the ice, and it doesn't look like anything has changed. But he said, look underneath. If you can see underneath the water, the ice is slowly breaking up, and there's some movement. As the movement goes forward, there's more breaking up of the ice. And so his analogy and his encouragement, encouraged us as well as TA providers, is that just that visual of there are efforts, you might not see it, but it is occurring. And then just looking at the priorities that might change as we're doing the prevention work in community. Sometimes another issue, another challenge might come up, and so we have to kind of switch gears. But by utilizing the SPIF, that's what really helps us kind of provide that anchor of going back to do assessment, to do capacity building, do planning, implementation, and evaluation. So always keeping that in mind as some of those priorities or needs might change in community. And then another important piece for sustainability is that the community sees results, and that they see those efforts over time, and they see themselves in the plan as well. And then we talked about youth. It's important to involve youth throughout all segments. And then also your vision, that the vision helps provide that guide or roadmap. So if there's changes in community, the staffing, there's turnover, that vision is still there to help guide or provide the roadmap for continuation of your efforts. Next slide, please. And the same for culture competency is really including, the target population. And looking at providing cultural appropriate prevention activities throughout each of the activities or events that are taking place. And then really seeking out and employing culturally competent evaluators is another important factor. And then building your capacity for culture competence. A lot of communities that work with Prevention activities, they might involve elders to provide teachings or guidance to youth, to outside community partners, or to adults or elders that are in the community. So providing that capacity and learning is important for sustainability. And when you're considering those cultural steps of the SPIF and inclusion of diverse groups, then they might participate more. They might see themselves in those events and feel comfortable to participate and see the benefits of their participation as well. I think that's the last one, Mark, if you can move forward. Next slide. Thank you, Mark. So we did talk about this on that last step 5 of the SPIF, well, more so regarding evaluation. But there are differences between assessment and evaluation. I think looking at assessment is some of those, what you do at the start or the beginning of initiative. And so looking at how we want to measure that, oftentimes that might be the community readiness model, assessing the readiness for our community's readiness for change. You might also do or see surveys or focus groups on youth risk and protective factors. You might do surveys for adults through assessment. And then evaluation is kind of broader and looks at have the objectives been met through the plan? Is the program effective? And what's the value? And what do we want to sustain or continue on past these current efforts? Next slide. I believe it's coming up.
Yeah.
For Hunter.
Thank you,
spectrum of-
Gloria. Appreciate that. And Jacqueline, awesome information. So I just wanted to touch briefly on this. Some of you have seen this diagram before in different prevention and behavioral health or mental health or public health models. And it's also in our substance abuse prevention skills training that we provide to grantees as well. So you'll see this in there. But just a little bit of history. It is a classification system that presents the scope of behavioral health services. And it was first introduced in 1994 as the mental health intervention spectrum. So this came out of the Institute of Medicine. And so, but it just kind of underscores the interrelationship among promotion, prevention, treatment, and maintenance. So I just wanted to touch on that real briefly. So next slide, Mark. And so as we take a look at the 3 tiers of prevention, now some of you, I believe in your NOFO, the later grantees have in your NOFO, it's been identified that your strategies should fit one of these 3 areas, 3 tiers of prevention, either universal, selective, or indicated. So when we take a look at universal, it seeks to include everyone in your community, aiming to reduce the prevalence or incidence of a condition. Selective addresses subgroups of the population who are at higher risk due to specific factors. And indicated focuses on individuals who are showing early signs or the risk factors for a problem, but who do not yet meet diagnostic criteria. So when we go to the next slide, let's take a look at some examples. So for instance, for indicated tier 3, you might see 988 hotline or mobile crisis teams. Tier 2 for selective, you might see mentorship programs or early intervention, substance use education. Maybe it's trauma-informed school counseling or peer support groups. Some of the curriculums that Native Connection grantees might use, for instance, Sons of Tradition or Daughters of Tradition from White Bison, it's only hitting a certain pocket of the population who maybe are using those curriculums because it's been identified. Maybe they're a little bit more at risk and based on community data or school data. Universal for all, some of these are community awareness campaigns, youth development programs, maybe your policies, you're rewriting or developing policies that's for the whole community, not just a single subgroup, or maybe a parental educate engagement program. So these would be other examples of prevention for indicated, selective, and universal. Next slide. And I think it's back to you, Gloria.
All right. Thank you. Looking at as you're implementing your prevention or your SAP, I know a lot of our contracts and grants require evidence-based interventions or evidence-based practices. And so really looking at how do we want to identify that? And I think that's an important part of the assessment. The capacity is, what is our capacity? What is our staffing? What are we able to do and take on? But looking at evidence-based practices is a good way to start of looking at, what change is needed, what would be helpful, who's our target audience, and what behavior is looking at change. And a lot of times it's proven through outcome evaluations. I think SAMHSA has an evidence-based practices resource site. That link is there. And so it looks at also evidence-based practices, but also promising practices, research-based practices, and emerging practices as well, and a listing of those for your consideration. You might go to the next couple slides, Mark, the one with the diagram, practice-based, the next one. So these are just examples, with what we've seen other communities or grantees take part in. The upper left corner, evidence-based practice, some examples that we've seen is QPR gatekeeper training, applied suicide intervention skills training, mental health first aid. That's both, you can do youth or adults. And then Safe Talk, tell, ask, listen, and keep safe. And when you're considering evidence-based practices, there might be trainings just to learn about those or become a first aider, but there are also trainings to become a trainer that you can do other trainings or become a master trainer in those each of those evidence-based practices. The two that are specific to American Indian or Alaska Native communities is that are on the evidence-based practices site or American Indian Life Skills Development curriculum. I think that's with Dr. Teresa Laframboise, and then Project Venture that Mac Hall and his team implement. So those are some good. They're not listed there, but I just wanted to mention those as well. And then a lot of our communities and a lot of our grantees are looking at traditional culture-based interventions, including language, restoring language, or looking at positive reinforcement through the traditional language, stories and songs, dances, prayers, culture camps or fish camps. A lot of you mentioned some of these within the youth summer activities that you have planned, as well as traditional kinship relationship systems. And looking at practice-based, what have we practiced in our communities over time? They might not have research-based, but they're anecdotal evidence that they are effective. And so a lot of our communities, it was mentioned before about potlucks and gatherings, community gatherings, GONA or GOAN, many of you are familiar with that. A digital storytelling workshop, leadership camps, and then men and women's wellness gatherings. And then some others that we also mentioned here, other examples. Many do awareness walks or runs. So we have suicide, alcohol, substance abuse prevention, walks and runs, domestic violence awareness, health fairs in our communities. Those are well attended, Red Ribbon Week, and other parenting classes. So just some examples as you're looking at your SAP and what interventions you might select. These are some that have been shared amongst other grantees. Next slide, I'll turn it over to Hunter.
Yeah, thanks. So we're gonna go just a little bit over time, and we apologize, been hanging in there with us. It is being recorded, so it'll be available to download off our Native Connections Resource Center. So, but I'm gonna have Mark go ahead and queue up a video, And we're going to see our culture is prevention at work in this very short video. So, Mark. And this speaks to what Gloria was just saying about cultural-based interventions or practice-based interventions. So we'll see how this young man uses culture to not engage in drug behavior or prescription drugs.
One, two.
What is this?
Hey, we need to call.
Our culture is our prevention. Make the right choice.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark, for playing that video. And I know that's a very strong, powerful video. I know a lot of us can probably relate to that video, and definitely how culture has helped us to make good choices or positive choices. As we think about the 3 tiers of prevention, if there was a cultural dance program open to all of the community, that would be universal. If it was just for boys, then we'd be looking at maybe indicated or selective. So it's, that's how you would kind of think about your prevention strategies in relation to strategic action plan, in relation to the 3 tiers of prevention. So thank you for watching that. I'm going to turn it over to Jacqueline, who's going to get us ready for the references here.
Yes, and I just wanted to ask the one question, if you can answer this in the chat, if there's any lingering thoughts or recommendations you'd like to add, put those in the chat. And if you have any need to ask further questions after we get off of this NLC, reach out to your GTAs and ask them for the information that they can assist you. So if you can go to the next slide, Mark, on references. This is just a list of references that we've used in our NLC today, and this will be available via recording. You can take a screenshot, and I will turn it back over to Hunter.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacqueline. And the link Jacqueline did put in the chat for that video. So if you're interested in that video and using it in your own community, the link is in the chat, and it is also on YouTube. It's called Culture as Prevention, and it's the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribe of Oklahoma that produced that using SAMHSA dollars. So that's awesome. I do want to mention, in just a future announcement, there will be another National Learning Community in 2 weeks. So on June 24th, at 2 o'clock Eastern. And you can join our fellow GTAs, Bobby Arthur and Candace So, as they review the Native Connection Symposium that recently took place in Minneapolis and Minnesota, in which we saw several of you there. And so that national learning community will be focused on that. So at this time, I'm going to just close us out with a short closing, and thank you for everyone for coming. Thank you, Creator, for everything that you have given us. Nibe mitigwok minwa okanak minwa wesin okanak minwa niwo mishkekiwok. The water, the trees, the animals, both domestic and wild, and also our medicines. So I wanted to say Chimigwech Kinawaya Gimijian Oma Ake. Thank you everyone for coming today, and we appreciate you. And we'll see you on the next, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.
Thank you.